So our next talk is Data Center Migration Essentials with two of our technical account managers, Adam Sampri and Tim Wong. An interesting thing to note is this is their 6th summit, so they have both been to every single Atlassian summit. Tim's been here every year as an Atlassian staff member. Adam has been here as a staff member, as a customer, and as a partner. So they can tell you some stories about the good old days if you're interested in hearing how that's changed over the years. So without further ado, Tim and Adam.
Okay. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending Atlassian Summit and our talk. My name's Adam St. Prix. This is Tim Wong, my colleague. We're both technical account managers on the Atlassian Enterprise team. Today we're going to be talking about migration essentials for moving to data center. This talk, obviously in 20 minutes, we're not going to do an exhaustive overview of how to migrate to data center, but we wanted to cover a kind of high-level checklist, things you want to think about when you're looking at moving to data center. Just quickly about who we are. Tim and I both grew up in Atlassian support. Tim's a 6-year veteran. I've been with the company for a little over 4 years. Tim is experienced primarily is on the Confluence side as a senior support engineer and recently joined the TAM team. He's handled over 4,000 plus enterprise support cases and is an amazing resource. Myself, I've been with the company, as I said, a little over 4.5 years. I'm primarily a JIRA expert. I'm a 5-time Atlassian customer and also previously worked as an expert. So just quickly, if you don't know what the technical account management program is, we're essentially dedicated resources for enterprise customers. We serve as a single point of contact into the Atlassian ecosystem to help you guys get the most out of your tools. So there's more information about that on the website. You can take a look at that under atlassian.com/enterprise/services. So let's get into the meat of the discussion. First question is, well, why move to data center? There are 3 primary reasons why you might look at moving to data center. The first really is around enterprise scalability. So you're looking to provide an improved quality of service and scale to allow administrators to redirect traffic and place different loads on different servers. The second reason really is around performance. And the goal there is to increase your ability to handle higher loads, improve the overall user experience, and provide a better performance experience for your user base. And then finally, the third reason that we hear about, obviously, is around high availability. And the main goal there being to eliminate the single point of failure that can occur if you're just running a single node. So today we're going to look at the migration process from 3 different angles. First, we'll talk a little bit about the technology that's involved in making the move. Secondly, we'll look at the process, some milestones and things you should be doing if you're not already. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the people that we've seen should be involved and that can really help the overall effort. So for the technology piece, I'm going to pass that on to Tim and let him talk about that.
Thanks, Everett. Thanks for the intro. So, I mean, for the most part, I'm going to make the assumption that you have some experience running our single server tools. So I'm just going to be highlighting the differences between single server versus data center, and some of the things that you might not have, might not have had lots of experience with. So this slide, I'm sure you've seen this about a dozen times this summit already. Brief overview, top down of how a data center would look like. But one of the key differences in data center is that you need a load balancer. And the load balancer here is responsible for routing the load between multiple servers. And this is what gives you the failover capability as well as high availability as well as horizontal scalability. So the first key thing I want to talk about in terms of things that you need to know about data center is failure modes. This is something new to the data center product. In single server, a failure mode is simply the server is crashed, and you can do nothing about it other than restart the server or recover. In data center, you can actually have one of your nodes fail or multiple nodes fail, and your service remains up. When this happens, the load balancer is responsible for moving the load from a failed server to a non-failed server. And this is called failover, pretty common in the industry. So one of the key things that you need to understand as a difference is understand this process. Now, this is largely technical in that your load balancer is designed to handle this eventuality, but there's things that you need to do from a technical side or from a human side to bring things back up and fail back to a normal state. And that's going to be very, very different from configuration to configuration. So you just need to know and inform your teams as to what the individual roles are in a failover state. So this slide is very similar to the last slide, except I've put a couple of numbers up here. You notice on the side I have 80% loaded. One of the other things that you need to worry about in design process is what happens if you have two servers that are 80% loaded and one of them fails. The load balancer does the right thing and it moves the load to the other side. However, now you have one server that's 160% loaded, and you can probably guess what happens here. So when you're designing your data center layout, you need to worry about cascade, where you don't want one server failure to cascade over into your other nodes, and then bring them down too, because then you get total server stoppage. It should look something more similar to this, where even if one server fails in this configuration, you won't get to a point where you can jeopardize the health of the entire server cluster with just one loss. So moving on, we're talking, this is an architecting slide. So this is a common way of thinking about it, very common. Like you just have multiple application servers, and this will give you redundancy. But here's another way of thinking about it. And just want to reiterate, this is optional. You don't have to think about it this way, but it's something that the data center product allows you to do. And that's to segregate your traffic into different classes, such that you can think of it as users versus automation or other things, right? You might say users in a particular region. Although I do want to caveat that this is not geoscaling, same data center only. Data center will allow you to, it gives you some functionality here in that you can balance based on load at the load balancer level. And when doing this, you can also build for redundancy, such that each individual server class is redundant. And furthermore, you can scale it differently. That is, maybe you have a lot more automation and a lot more API usage than users. So you can build out based on the quality of service that you want to enforce in your setup. So moving on, another key difference between single server and data center, well, it's obviously that you have more servers, a lot more servers, possibly. When you think about that, you might have a testing server, UAT, staging, development. You're going to need synchronous numbers of servers across the different modes. So you might be moving from a 3-server configuration to a 12 with three separate environments. So managing these configurations are largely going to be similar is difficult, and you might want to think about using virtualization and automation to help that. Now, how you do this is going to be very, very dependent on your own skill sets as well as your own capabilities internally. But there are a number of vendors that definitely have tools to help with this, like VMware, just in a simple VM snapshotting and that kind of thing. Docker. There was a talk recently just at Summit about Docker. Or you can use common tools to control provisioning and change management, like Puppet and Chef. Next, in order to manage scale in data center products, there's a lot more servers, which means there's a lot more complexity, which means that in order to find a problem with your server or a problem with the state, it's really important to invest in monitoring. That is, it's ideal to have a single pane of glass such that you can analyze your server health across multiple servers and from end to end, from top, the load balancer and traffic aggregation layer, all the way to the bottom, database layer. So investing in monitoring is going to pay huge dividends in terms of helping you troubleshoot whatever problems that might arise. Next, I want to talk about gotchas, things that you might not have thought about before making the data center move. And most of you have seen this. This is the marketplace where you install plugins, where you can find plugins and add-ons for whatever product. And all the add-ons that you'll be using will need to have the data center flag, which means that the vendor who created the plugin has certified that it is safe to use in the data center environment, which is not universally true. Not all plugins and add-ons will have this flag, and you need to make sure that whatever you're relying on before making the move to data center is available in a data center mode. Also, I mentioned there's lots of servers. They all talk to shared storage in data center environments. Something you need to remember to do is update what happens when that happens, when you lose your storage, or the fact that the key points of your instance, they're now on a different file system. You need to update disaster recovery plans to take into account the fact that things have moved. The last point I want to talk about from technology side is that high availability means that you reduce the number of single points of failure there are. That is, in this diagram, you might want to do things like this to reduce the number of single points of failure. Instead of a load balancer, you might have multiple load balancers. Instead of a database, you have database clusters. Instead of shared storage, you might have redundant storage. Of course, this is ideal thinking and maybe not in line with reality, but you want to design solutions that fit for your company in terms of cost, in terms of capability, in terms of timelines. So that's it for the technology piece. I'll pass it back to Adam.
All right. Thanks, Tim. So in looking at the process piece, I'm going to go over a couple of different milestones that we've seen in the process of making the migration that we find to be really helpful, key, and sometimes often overlooked. I spoke with a TAM customer earlier this year about our Data Center Pioneer program they were considering joining. And as part of that process, I said to them, well, tell me a little bit about what you do when you go through a JIRA upgrade, because for them, a migration to data center meant actually upgrading the product. And I was really interesting. I wanted to share this quote, and this is what they had to say. This was a 2,000 user company. Well, we tend to just upgrade. We flip a switch, we send an email on the weekend, and we hope it works. Needless to say, I thought we should probably revisit that plan. So in thinking about that, we kind of outlined 6 phases or 6 major steps that we think are really critical in a move to something like data center, but also they kind of also apply to any major upgrade in the enterprise. So those phases, as we've kind of defined them, are as such. So the first really is around that testing period. Enterprise deployments, that time frame is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and sometimes more, depending on how complex the deployment is. We have a refining stage, really that's around a month, where the teams are just hardening what they've learned in that test period. Documentation, obviously, is really key. You'd be surprised how many people don't document what they're doing, even in large enterprise deployments. We usually estimate 1 to 2 weeks total for that. The commit phase, I'll talk a little bit more about each of these things, but the commitment phase really is about when you make a final decision to actually do the deployment. And then executing generally will happen over the course of a weekend. Typically, it's a 1-day event, but we'll have a 3-day window or so where we plan on addressing any issues that occur during the migration. And then this piece, I think, kind of speaks a little bit to the flip a switch and hope it works. And that is, we found that usually a migration like this or a major upgrade, really there's a break-in period that occurs after the upgrade that is anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes slightly more. So once you finish the upgrade, that is not the time to go on vacation. Probably a good idea to stick around and make sure that you have some time to let the dust settle. So let's look at this a little bit more. Another thing that's kind of important to note is this entire process in the UAT phases tends to repeat. So you may spend quite a bit of time in the testing, refining, documentation and maybe even committing a couple of different times to different dates depending on where you are. So I'll dive into each of these just a little bit. So that testing phase, for enterprise customers, really testing is probably the largest milestone. It's the long pole. It's where the bulk of the work happens. So if you've been doing this for any amount of time, you know that that is the case. I want to emphasize here really the main takeaway is about planning, testing, and repeating that cycle. So I'm going to dive in just a little bit into some of the process milestones. That first phase around setup, usually 1 to 2 weeks. One of the things we recommend is having multiple UAT cycles. It gives you a couple of different things. We've seen customers that were moving to data center and large-scale teams doing multiple UAT cycles. So 3, sometimes 4 different UAT cycles of 1 to 2 weeks, roughly. One of the things that's nice here is very often you'll get from your executive management, they'll say, how long is this gonna take? Well, when you first start out, you have no idea. UAT gives you an opportunity to determine how long it's gonna take to do the actual upgrade, how long my database restores are gonna take, how long is my reindexing gonna take. This phase is really key. It's great for getting feedback from users and understanding and hardening what the timelines are gonna be for the overall upgrade process. So really, really important. It also gives you a buffer in case things go wrong or don't go as planned. Beyond that, we typically go into this commit phase, or what a lot of teams or ops teams will call a go, no go decision, where they decide, are we ready or not? Really, really important. Not every team does this, but I find this is it's a critical gut check and really important step to take as part of your overall migration plan. And again, optional, but we've seen this work very well with a lot of teams, and that is doing a mock deployment. So before you actually make the move to the production environment, doing a mock deployment so you do a dry run of what it would actually be like. So really important. And then finally, if all goes well, we'd launch and our rocket would take off as expected. So. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of these other points. The refining phase, as I mentioned, really is around getting through those UAT cycles, understanding properly what it is that you're up against, and giving your teams a chance to harden their process, come up with a repeatable set of steps that they can use to make the migration successful. So there's a lot of pressure on the teams to make upgrades and migrations like this a success. So we like to think as part of those UAT and that refinement process that even though there is quite a bit of pressure there on the teams, that in the end you'll end up with some nice gems that give you a good deployment in your production environment. So documentation, my recommendation here really is to document as you go. Don't wait until the end to try to remember every single thing that happened. As you get through each phase, make sure you're documenting the steps as you go, capturing things like network and architecture diagrams and details about the servers. So this is just a sample document that I borrowed from our teams. It's not exactly what we use, but just as an example of what kind of things you should have on your team and make available to members of your team. Again, this is all part of the repeatable process that allows you to hand off to another team member who may not be familiar with all the steps involved. So super important. Commitment really is around this go, no go decision, as I mentioned earlier. A gut check where you allow your team members collectively to decide, are we ready to launch or not? So I'm gonna now move into talking a little bit about the people aspect of this. It's another area that I think is often very overlooked. Your main goal here is to communicate with team members, recruit people to help you. How many people here are a single admin and plan on doing this migration by themselves? Okay, yeah, so this is for you, this piece. There's two kind of different roles that we see being really key in all this. So the first is on the more tactical side. Obviously, our JIRA admins are gonna be responsible for the bulk of the heavy lifting. Hopefully you have some help from your IT ops teams. but there's some other people I think you should have involved. So one of them, help desk. Frontline people, when the migration is done, that can answer questions and first level support, because you will be responsible for handling some of the back-end issues that are happening, and you don't want to be trying to field first level questions about something that you didn't expect to come across. So obviously DBA and sysadmin, you're going to want them as part of your team. In some cases, one person can do a lot of this work, but as your deployments get bigger, and you're talking about 20, 30, 40,000 users, it makes a lot of sense to distribute the load among different people. So some other roles, stakeholders in UAT, really these are the folks that you want to recruit to help you get the deployment and migration done. So we found that reaching out to a number of different stakeholders in JIRA, usually that means project administrators. In Confluence, it's often space administrators or people that you know are heavy users of the system, getting them prepared for the upgrade plan and getting them to help you and sign up for doing UAT testing so that you know you have coverage across the instance. And when your migration is complete, you're not concerned about various aspects of the system not being what people expect to see. So very important. Another thing, so as part of our enterprise services, we now have a premier support team that does 24/7 support over the weekends. If you're doing this migration over the weekend, like most people will be, very important to have a group of people on staff that can help you with that. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already. And then finally, again, for the one-person teams, experts. We have certified partners, platinum and enterprise partners that have done this. There are a couple of different partners that were highlighted earlier this week who have already been through this several times. So if you're finding that you need help, I encourage you to take a look at those folks as well. Okay, I'm about to get kicked off, so I will just quickly on the strategic side, some folks, obviously executive management, having buy-in, critical to getting this done successfully. A steering committee is another thing that we've seen work really well, having a group of peers that you can go to help guide the migration process, very important. I just have two more and then I'll be done. A technical PM, we've seen this work wonders, especially in cases where you have a single admin that's trying to do everything. It's very hard to keep on task of milestones and do all the technical implementation details. If you have a technical PM, that can work wonders. So. One other thing we've seen, corporate communications team. We've seen companies leverage corporate communications to get the message out to the overall user base. You can delegate some of that messaging to a team that's used to doing that all day long and get their help. Super, super valuable. And then finally, Tim and I, as TAMs, can be very helpful in providing you some strategic guidance around the migrations and giving you insight into how Atlassian works and things you want to be thinking about with the migration. So. I'm not going to go through all these. This is just a summary of essentials and then some recommended things that we think you may want to consider. So thank you. Hope you guys enjoy Summit.